If you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss will also gaze into you and tell you, if saving you is a sin, then I'll gladly become a sinner. Okay, all jokes aside, what is Nihility? What is 9? And is 9 tarot card actually 9? From Fable's video, we have this information about 9. All progress toward the void. All resist the void. All will become the void. Blindfold your eyes, they say, that the approaching darkness may strike no fear in you. Let it not burden your soul, nor numb your stride. To know which tarot card 9 is, we must consider the background, the philosophical theme, the physics, and the math involved in the design of IX's lore. Yes, there is going to be some physics and math in this video. The disclaimer is that even though I did do my research, I'm a layman in both physics and math, so I won't touch upon too in-depth things, and everything will be explained in layman's terms instead of the correct way of expressing it, which is in math. The decision to include a bit more math in this video than the previous news video is due to the credit of Awesome 7006, whose comment about complex numbers and the possible role of the roots of unity spurred me to actually look into the Sea of Dirac and how it's connected to 9 in Honkai Star Rail. Part of this video is actually taken from our comment chain discussing the role of complex numbers and Euler's formula in Honkai Star Rail worldbuilding. So, if you want to check out their original comment, it's in the news video. Another disclaimer is that the theories presented here aren't necessarily the mainstream theories in quantum mechanics. These theories are just the ones popular among science fiction writers, more specifically the Hoyoverse science fiction writers. Even though Hoyoverse did hire actual theoretical physicists as consultants, not all the physics they use here will necessarily be part of the standard model. Well, it's mixed with fiction after all. To start with, for the background lore of 9. According to some drunken galaxy rangers, 9 is actually a machine, a device called 9. Supposedly, device 9 is related to the dark web, which separates reality from the nihility. The exact nature of this dark web and who, or what, created device 9 is unknown. From Acheron's animation with Black Swan, we know for certain that 9 is actually a black hole, but different from real life. It's connected to a red sea called the Sea of Memory, where mimetic entities are born and where Syntherstus inevitably ends up in at the end of their journey. This sea is going to be important later. Regardless, as far as the theme is concerned, it's pretty easy to see that the nihility is inspired by Nietzsche's concept of nihilism and Heraclitus' definition of death. The idea of nihilism as posited by Nietzsche is best understood by reviewing the historical context of the famous quote, "God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers?" In the time that Nietzsche lived in, the Enlightenment movement and the Industrial Revolution were in full swing. Old theological beliefs like flat Earth, geocentrism, and God as the creator of lives on Earth were all being challenged by the development of modern science. Hence, God is dead because we have killed him. But as science progressed, a good chunk of old philosophers and theists became concerned that as people lose their beliefs in the Christian God, they would lose their morality and goals, becoming soulless machines of science and no longer caring about life. While Nietzsche wasn't the only one concerned with this, nor was he even the first one to do so, Nietzsche's expression of the sentiment became the most iconic among those of the Romanticism side. Nihilism, Nietzsche argues, is the death of the self as one succumbs to the slave mentality, unable to break free and live as the new god of oneself, the Übermensch. In other words, it's the plot of Acheron's Past on Izumo, as she was literally forced to become the new collective consciousness of her world, to prevent every soul in it from being swallowed by a literal black hole, the shadow of 9. In Nietzsche's words, she had used her will to power in an attempt to overcome the void of nihility. Well, technically, she is still a self-annihilator. She just extended her journey to the nihility to infinity, so she's more like an Übermensch in training more than anything else, but you get the idea. By the way, this isn't the first time that Hoyo made an association between a Raiden May face to the Nietzsche's image of an Übermensch overcoming nihility. She had an armor called God Killer in the finale of Gun Girl Z2. So, yeah, historically, May has always been associated with Nietzsche, the nihility, and killing God. Interestingly, this means that based on the line about how nihility is the other side of reality, it probably means that nihility is going to be paired with finality again in the Hoyo version of Gnostic pairing scheme. Who knows? In any case, Nietzsche isn't the only philosophical inspiration for Acheron and the nihility in general. In the Penacony main quest, death is defined as a puddle of still water, which originated from Heraclitus, who, incidentally, was also the guy who coined the concept of logos, or logic and ratio, in modern English. According to Heraclitus, still water is death, moving fire is life, and you can't cross the same river twice. Evidently, it was no coincidence that our first introduction to ratio was him being engulfed by the phase flame, signifying life. In the same way, Ratio acted as a fire to Aventurin's still water tendency in his message to Aventurin in 2.2, encouraging him to not succumb to the allure of the deep river of nihility. With the exact same theme, paralleling Aventurin and Ratio in 2.2 is the Deep Water Relic set, where we have the journey between Acheron and Freebase. By the time Acheron met Freebase, Acheron was already an emanate of nihility, while Freebase was a hapless nameless seeking to discover the limit of a black hole. "Because I will walk on a road deeper and further than Achilles," she said. Long story short, Acheron and Freebase ate marshmallows together and promised that they would walk together till the end. But in the river of nihility itself, Acheron and Freebase parted ways, for Acheron thought that that was Freebase's true wish. In the end, as Freebase fell into the black hole, she became a puddle of still water. So yes, Acheron was in the role of Ratio, the fire of life here, the Übermensch who wished to kill God and to replace God as the guide for the rest of humanity out the nihility, while Freebase was Aventurin, the puddle of still water, the self-annihilator that succumbs to the nihility. Albeit, the story between Acheron and Freebase has different outcomes from the story between Ratio and Aventurin. Or does it? Our answer to this question lies in the meaning of the Nihility Aeon's tarot card, Death. You might wonder why 9 is Death, and not the actual 9th card in the major arcana, the Hermit. Well, it was because 9 and the path of nihility in general has a very, very, very strong association with the underworld and death in general. For one, Acheron is literally a river in the Greek underworld, sometimes known as the River of Woe. Acheron is the gateway and one of the rivers where the Psycho-Pompsharon leads dead souls into the underworld after death. In addition, Acheron's Chinese name is Huangqian, which is also the river of death that the dead souls must cross to the other shore to arrive at the underworld. You can see how this is heavily featured in Acheron's lore and role as the guide for Synthirsters across the river of nihility. Synthirsters are, effectively, pathstriders who strayed away from their paths and died. Under the effect of IX's black hole, they are doomed to repeat what they did in life as ghostly shadows until all of their memories fade away and they are consumed by the event horizon of the nihility. For the people who aren't actually ready to die and still have other goals in the mortal world like Aventurin, she leads them back to life, which was, in the case of Penacony, the primordial dreamscape which exists as an islet in the river of memories, a temporary resting place, so to speak, before you actually reach the true death in the event horizon of the black hole. Speaking of Aventurin, do you remember when Aventurin baited Acheron to slash at him in Penacony, so he could verify for himself whether death is possible in Penacony? The name for Aventurin's point of view chapters is Danse Macabre, which is a reference to a medieval European genre involving skeletons and people dancing with death. See, back then Europe and the Middle East were hit very hard by the Black Death, which caused the death of roughly 30 to 60% of the European population and around 30% of the Middle Eastern population. This, in turns, led to the creation of an artistic genre called Danse Macabre, or Dance with Death, in Europe. For artworks in this genre, people often depicted dancing skeletons mingling with dancing humans, all to symbolize that death is universal, a fact of life, and it will come to all. This means that when Aventurin's point of view was named Dance with Death, it was actually alluding to not only his resolve to die, but also to his fight against Acheron, the death in the Dance with Death. Incidentally, historically, the artwork on the Death Tarot card was also part of the Danse Macabre genre and originally depicted the Black Death. Over time, As memories of the Black Death faded away, people started to assign the meaning of the Death card as something more positive, as spiritual death and rebirth. But back when it was first conceived, the Death card was really Dance with Death, the Black Death, the universality of physical death. But it's not just Acheron's name and her role as the guide across the river of death that connect us between death and Nine. Her home world, Izumo, is actually also another reference to hell. While in the modern day, Izumo is only a city in Japan's Shermaine Prefecture, historically, the ancient land of Izumo was the land of the dead, known for its misty atmosphere, thought to be infested with miasma, and the myth connecting it to the two mythical creator gods of Japan, Izanami and Izanagi. Izanami and Izanagi were a pair of siblings and husband and wife, who procreated with each other to create the Japanese pantheon and the land of Japan. However, when Izanami gave birth to the fire god, Katsuguchi, she died burning because fire god. She was later buried in Mount Hiba in between Izumo and Huki. But Izanagi could not cope with the grief and tried to visit her corpse in an attempt to wrestle her back from the grasp of Yomi, the underworld inside the mountain cave of Izumo. And yes, that was why Raiden Shogun's boss domain in Genshin was in a cave inside a mountain. In addition to the other reference to Amaterasu hiding in a cave, of course, and why Raiden Ice's entire character theme resolved around her inability to cope with the loss of her sibling. I was Izanagi, and Makoto was Izanami. However, by then, she had turned into a rotting corpse, infested with maggots, so Izanagi fled. The rotting Izanami tried to chase after him, but Izanagi threw a boulder at the cave entrance, creating the boundary between the living world and the underworld in Izumo. So effectively, Acheron's homeworld itself, Izumo, was a literal gateway to the underworld, hence why its ultimate fate was being swallowed by Nine. But did you notice that this myth about Izanami and Izanagi referenced by Acheron's homeworld also deals with death and resurrection? In any case, considering that Acheron is the guide across the river of death, and said river of death is Nine, that means Nine is, you guess it, death. I personally think it is no coincidence that the river of hell in Chinese myths, aside from Huangquan, so is also called Jiuquan, Nine Springs. Get it? Nine springs. In other words, all progress toward the void, all resist the void, all will become the void, and what will inevitably come to us all but death. However, the final question remains, is Nine the death card in Honkai Star Rail using the historical meaning of permanent final death or modern meaning of spiritual death and rebirth? To solve this question, we must look into the real-life inspiration for Nine and how Hoyoverse writers have used that real-life inspiration in the other titles Honkai 2 and 3. As far as real-life inspiration is concerned, ever since Acheron's animation with Black Swan, it has always been very obvious that Nine is inspired off the black hole in real life. For a quick recap of the real-life black hole structure, a black hole is effectively a singularity, a very dense and heavy singular point in the fabric of space-time. Yes, space-time is literally a fabric, and you can imagine the black hole as a super heavy needle pin weighing down the fabric, creating a sinkhole in the space-time fabric. In terms of math, there is something called the Schwarzschild radius, a solution to Einstein's field equations. The solution predicted that each object has a Schwarzschild radius, a mathematical limit of sort around them, and this limit depends on its mass. For objects like stars at the end of their lives, some types of stars can become denser and collapse into itself, but without losing its mass, like the star dying. Most stars, like our sun, would be light enough in weight to just end up as a white dwarf, a cold lump of materials, basically. However, when the object is heavy enough, it would cross the Schwarzschild radius in its shrinking process, starting the now unstoppable collapse of all the object's mass into a single point called the singularity. At that point, a black hole will be born, with the Schwarzschild radius of the original object becoming the mathematical parameter for the event horizon of the newly formed black hole. Like the original object that collapsed into itself once it has crossed the Schwarzschild radius, most objects that fall into the event horizon of the black hole cannot escape, barring some special cases. Now, This might seem overly complicated, but I assure you, it's fully intentional on the Honkai writers. In Acheron animation, Black Swan was almost sucked into the event horizon of the black hole inside Acheron, only managing to escape with the skin of her teeth because Acheron didn't think to actually eat her. In the Penacony main quest, we were also shown the concept of the horizon of existence, which is blatantly based on the event horizon of black hole. This means that the primordial dreamscape in Penacony is basically just an islet near the actual event horizon of the black hole, meant to catch people from completely falling into the black hole of Nihility. And interestingly, there are some special things happening in the boundary of the event horizon that Hoyo has specifically referenced many times across all Honkai titles so far. Do you remember when I said that most objects that fall into the event horizon of the black hole cannot escape, barring some special cases? Well, Hawking Radiation is that special case, and Honkai Star Rail Acheron, Honkai 2 and 3 Seal, and Ankelguy's entire plot were based on that phenomenon. Named after the famed theoretical physicist Stephen Hawking, Hawking radiation is the emission that escapes from the black hole and leads to the black hole losing its mass over time, which eventually ends with its evaporation, the death of a black hole. The true nature of Hawking radiation is hard to explain, and reading over the links I put in the description would probably help. But in overly simplified layman's terms, in quantum field theory, a vacuum is defined as a pair of virtual particle and virtual antiparticle locked into a constant creation and annihilation process. As in, the particle and the antiparticle are constantly born and instantly annihilate each other right after they were born. Hence, neither came into existence, and the vacuum is actually an empty space. However, in a black hole's event horizon, because the gravitational force of the black hole is too stupidly strong, it effectively pokes a hole in the space-time vacuum. Well, this explanation isn't very accurate, but for ease of thoughts, just imagine it like that, shall we? Anyway, it is due to this hole that sometimes a particle escapes from the vacuum of empty space and the boundary of the event horizon. As it runs away from the event horizon, it does not get annihilated by its pair, the antiparticle, that is still captured by the black hole's gravity and stuck inside the event horizon. In effect, the black hole has emitted Hawking radiation, which is the particle that successfully runs away from its antiparticle. And since the black hole has swallowed only the negative energy half of the pair, it means the black hole has lost energy. Now, as the particle that got away flies away from the black hole, it will slowly lose energy, decrease in frequency, and gain a longer wavelength. For a hypothetical observer standing inside black hole, the light of the particle would appear to turn redder. This phenomenon is called redshift. Conversely, the antiparticle that keeps falling into the black hole would appear to turn bluer to our hypothetical observer, and this phenomenon is called blue shift. And now you know why there is a red seal and a blue seal, and why it was specifically blue seal who fell into the sea of Quanta, and not red seal. Because redshift seal is the particle that got out, while the blue shift seal is the antiparticle that kept falling into the black hole. This plot point has actually been around since Gun Girl Z, where it was more blatantly stated that the two seal are supposed to be two different quantum states of the same girl after she fell into the sea of Quanta, the particle that exists and the antiparticle that doesn't exist. In the same vein, you can see how this same design philosophy was applied to purple Acheron and red Acheron. The red of red Acheron means life, and the purple version presumably means death. There is a very good reason why she told us and Tiernan that if we ever find ourselves lost in a black hole, follow the red of life to find our way out of the black hole. And if you have played through Swarm and Amphoreus, you would also see the exact same plot point being used for Ankelguy Nanook and the Golden Scapegoat game. But the short gist is that in Eladigna during Swarm, our Ankelguy split into two halves, a nameless with amnesia traveling on the gondola Astral Express and a Synthursto wandering the destroyed land of Eladigna. A masked fool, who was probably just Sparkle, stole his memories and made him forget that he was a self-annihilator. But at the end, his memories were returned to him, and he met his Synthursta self again. As the two halves met, the annihilation reaction occurred under the power of the equilibrium, and both disappeared. The next thing we know, the Ankelguy, presumably the nameless half, had been reborn on Adlavan as baby Nanook, thanks to Aha meddling. And if the MV for the Japanese version of the Nameless Faces song is any indication, Phainon is presumably the synthirsta half, forever doomed to repeat what he did in life, unknowing that he had already died. After all, it is no coincidence that the golden scapegoat game in Amphoreus is 1, all about the creation-annihilation reaction between the goat of the present and its own antiparticle past self, and 2, all about a golden scapegoat, which has been a symbol of Nanook themselves ever since the Duke Inferno trailer. For more context on Ankle Guy Nanook's story, you can watch my lore video retelling his story over here. And, well, there is a reason why Nikator's entire plot was basically a paraphrase of Nietzsche's quote, "God is dead. God remains dead. And we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement? What sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it?" So, by now, you have probably guessed what the Red Sea of Memories in the Black Hole of Honkai Star Rail actually is, right? If you guessed the Sea of Dirac, also known as the Sea of Quanta in Honkai 3, then congratulations, you would be correct. So, in plain terms, the black hole in Honkai Star Rail has been conflated with another concept called the Sea of Dirac. Do you remember the part when I told you about how vacuum is actually a virtual particle locked into a constant creation-annihilation reaction with its pair, the virtual antiparticle? Conceived by theoretical physicist and mathematician Paul Dirac, the Sea of Dirac is a vacuum of positrons, which are the negative energy antiparticle pair of our everyday life positive energy electrons. It is a very similar concept to modern quantum field theory about vacuum and Fermi sea, and it is, in fact, the precursor to the modern quantum field theory about Fermi sea, just that the Sea of Dirac is specifically about electrons and positrons rather than all fermions. Now, Hoyo isn't actually the first to connect the black hole to the Sea of Dirac and time travel. Even way back then in 1988, Jeffrey A. Landis had written a short story called Ripples in the Dirac Sea, which involved a person jumping into the Dirac Sea to travel back in time and change his own predestined death. As Dancer jumped back in time, he met and became friends with his own past self, but he could never change the future that was already determined. In the end, Dancer opted to forever jump back into the past and live in the borrowed time that happened before his death. This story is actually directly referenced in-game as a category of achievements, actually. Continuing this tradition, Neon Genesis Evangelion, one of Hoyoverse's longtime obsessions, also depicted the Sea of Dirac as a literal Red Sea and a mechanism for time travel. Initially, the Sea of Dirac appeared as a pocket dimension of the angel Lelio, who went around swallowing the main cast in order to find out what makes them tick. However, the Dirac Sea was later revealed to have been blended with Jewish mysticism. The Dirac Sea in Lilith's moon is the source of the LCL Tang water, the Red Sea where all of humanity's souls were housed in before Lilith gave birth to humanity by opening the Chamber of Guff. Very long story on that, but the short version is that human souls were the positrons in the Tang Sea of Dirac in the Evangelion verse. In the conclusion of the story, in the end of Evangelion, the Red Sea is once again used as a mechanism for time travel after Lilith decided to give humanity a new cycle as floating positrons in the Red Sea. In the Honkai series, you can kind of see that the Sea of Quanta, the Red Sea of Memories, inherited bits and pieces of both of these depictions while merging them with more real-life math and physics. As modern science connects the Fermi Sea to the phenomenon Hawking radiation from the black hole, the Honkai series connects the Sea of Quanta to the black hole itself, designating the black hole as the gateway to said Sea of Quanta. The particle and antiparticle pairs became pairs of blue-shift characters and redshift characters, and of course, it's always the redshift design that escapes the black hole and becomes life, while the blue-shift design always falls back into the black hole and becomes death. Consequently, the Sea of Antiparticles becomes the Sea of Memories and mimetic life forms, beings that don't have physical forms and exist solely as thoughts. While in real life, the Dirac Sea is visualized as a dynamic vacuum of creation and annihilation that exists everywhere. The Dirac Sea in Honkai series is interpreted as a literal sea of death and rebirth that exists everywhere, albeit in an alternate dimension behind the black hole. Mainly because 9 is a big fat singularity that pokes a hole in the space-time fabric. At the same time, because of the LCL Sea of Dirac in Evangelion, the Sea of Quanta behind the black hole in Honkai is conflated with the Dead Sea of the Dead Sea Scroll fame. And of course, because of Evangelion, the Dirac Sea became the Sea of Death and Rebirth in Honkai 3. Therein lies our answer. I'm digressing, but at this point, you have probably already guessed what is the true identity of the Black Tides in Amphoreus. Yeah, it's just the Sea of Quanta, the Nihility, encroaching on the romantic world sustained by the imaginary, again. Effectively the exact same plot of Izumo and Honkai 3. Funny story, I actually guessed that the Black Tide was either the Nihility or anti-organic equation way back in 2.6 based on Elysian Realm plot and Nietzsche, but I put less weight on Nietzsche because the possibility of the Black Tide being Nihility didn't have much actual in-game evidence back then. But now, Amphoreus has been released, and it has been shown that the Titans very evidently aren't inflicted with a virus telling them to save humanity at all cost. In fact, it was the total reverse, and they all seem to genuinely be in pain, with the humans infected by the Black Tides seeing the dead suffering and calling for them to join the Black Tides. As such, it's pretty clear that it's not the anti-organic equation and is just the Nihility enacting its effects on the Synthirsters, the citizens of Amphoreus, again. And, well, you can see this pretty clearly in the MV of the Japanese version of Nameless Faces. If you're interested in how I narrowed down the possibilities to the Nihility or anti-organic equation with Nietzsche back then, you can check that video in the description. Just skip the part where I yap about the anti-organic equation, lol. Regardless, because of the conflation between the mathematical Dirac Sea, the black hole, and the Sea of Life from Jewish mysticism in Evangelion, and because of how insanely influential Evangelion has been to the development and direction of story writing in the anime and manga industry, the Dirac Sea in the East Asian media is now commonly depicted as not only a sea of annihilation and death, but is also a sea of creation and rebirth. You can see this in the Fate franchise as well, where multiple characters affiliated with the shadow element, from Sakura to BB to Tiamat, can access an alternate imaginary dimension where the Sea of Death and creation lies, usually with a red ball of mud like how Evangelion depicted the Chamber of Guff as the moon. Similarly, in the Honkai series, after falling into the death and rebirth, the Blue Shift Seal did not actually die for real. Very unlike how real-life physics work for an actual black hole, Blue Shift Seal survived and gained a new form as the ruler of life and death, or Hushers of Rebirth in the English version. She has always managed to escape from the Sea of Quanta, reuniting herself with her redshift particle state and engaging in the creation process for a happy ending. In the same vein, in Honkai Star Rail, instead of becoming spaghetti in the black hole event horizon, Acheron only split into two states, redshift and blue shift, where the redshift state of life signals the way out of the black hole for the self-annihilators inside the black hole. Thus, despite being the still water of death in the philosophy Heraclitus, neither blue shift Acheron or Aventurin actually died. Both of them managed to continue their existence outside of the black hole with the assistance of their respective redshift counterpart, the fire of life in Heraclitus philosophy. So, what does this mean for the Death Tarot card of 9? I think that using historical data from Honkai 2, 3, and Penacony, it's pretty reasonable to assume that Hoyo is using the modern meaning of the Death card for 9, the meaning of spiritual death and rebirth, instead of the original meaning of, well, the Black Death and the permanent physical death. In other words, you can say that 9 as the Death card might as well be the Sea of Nihility and Neogenesis. Once Acheron the Ubermensch successfully kills the god of the Nihility to finish her training arc, that will be when the Neon Genesis begins. All progress toward the void. All resist the void. All will become the void. Blindfold your eyes, they say, that the approaching darkness may strike no fear in you. Let it not burden your soul, nor numb your stride. For it is not the end. It sounds very positive, but unfortunately, this also means that there are some ramifications for the state of the Honkai Star Rail world. For one, This definitely means that Ouroboros, the Aeon of veracity that went missing halfway through Swarm, is most definitely alive and will return in the proverbial Neo-Genesis moment. According to Fully's chapter in Swarm, the Ouroboros is a dusk leviathan swimming in the Red Sea of memories. In other words, the Dirac Sea of death and rebirth. Swarm event already heavily suggested that Ouroboros never actually died, but with the way Hoyo has treated the Dirac Sea as more of a sea of spiritual death and rebirth than it is a sea of permanent death, I personally think it's quite reasonable to assume that Ouroboros will most definitely come back from inside the black hole, having undergoing a spiritual death and now transformed into something else. Something more final. And now for some final copium. We know from Acheron that Freebase underwent spaghettification and became a puddle of still water. However, from Freebase's point of view in the relic set, in her final moments, she actually saw the redshift Acheron, the red color of life, the fire of Heraclitus. I think there's a real possibility that as she fell into the sea of Quanta, she also split into two quantum states like Seal did. Maybe blue shift Acheron only saw the blue shift Freebase, who is the antiparticle falling into the black hole, while the redshift Acheron of the future, the one who has already managed to kill God, met with the redshift Freebase traveling from the past to the future to meet her again. Maybe this is the same fate that befalls Hanu as well when he was killed in the dream and fell into the black hole. Maybe one state of him is actually still alive in the Scodinger's cat box. Maybe Freebase the redshift state will actually become an emanator of finality after undergoing the spiritual death in the black hole. After all, Freebase is still based on Phlebas, which is an alternate name of Adonis, who is the lover of Aphrodite that died and caused Aphrodite to bleed red roses. But at the same time, Adonis is Adonai as the god of spring, and rebirth is Jesus. Or maybe I'm just overdosing on copium. But at the very least, the time dilation equation was actually directly cited in Ratio's splash art, so maybe this copium has some weight to it. But regardless of my personal copium, with this video, we have managed to determine that 9 is probably the death card in the major arcana, albeit one with a modern meaning of spiritual death and rebirth rather than the historical meaning of the plague. In the process, we have also dug up some references the Hoyo science fiction writers have mixed in for 9, including Nietzsche, Heraclitus, Chinese mythology, Japanese mythology, Greek mythology, Jewish mythology, real-life physics, real-life math, science fiction tropes, and Evangelion. It may seem a bit complicated, but books like Hawking's Universe in a nutshell provide a good explanation for the general layman audience, and I highly recommend giving it a read if you're interested in the topic, in addition to the links in the description. Fun fact, Hawking's book Universe in a nutshell was actually directly referenced in the game as a category of achievements. In any case, how would you rate the quality of my copium about Freebase? What do you think about a possible connection between Yaoshi and 9 through math? What role do Ouroboros and the finality play in the world building? And what would be the finale of Amphoreus? Please like and subscribe to see how interesting lore and theories about Honkai Star Rail.